So let's dive into a book that has stirred up a ton of conversation: Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, an antidote to chaos. In this explainer, we're going to break down some of the core ideas that make this book so compelling. Right off the bat, the book hits you with this really strange question. Have you ever noticed this? We're so careful with our pets' medication, right down to the last drop. But when it comes to our own prescriptions, not so much. Why is that? And this isn't just some random observation about self-care. The book argues that the answer to this question gets to the very heart of its main idea, that a meaningful life is all about walking this fine line between two huge fundamental forces: order and chaos. So before we can even get to any of the rules, we have to wrap our heads around this foundational concept, this idea that life is this constant dance between these two realities. And what's really interesting here is it's not simply good versus bad. Think of order as everything you know. It's your home, your schedule, your security. It's safe. Chaos, on the other hand, is the great unknown. It's where all the potential and new possibilities are. But yeah, it can also be totally overwhelming, even terrifying. All right, so let's jump into the first rule. And it starts in, well, probably the last place you'd ever expect, with lobsters. No, really, lobsters. We're going back 350 million years here. The book uses lobsters as this super ancient example of how living creatures are basically hardwired to understand and respond to social hierarchy. And this is where it gets wild. Look at what happens to a lobster after a fight. The winner gets a shot of serotonin, it stands up taller, more confident, ready for the next challenge. The loser? Its brain chemistry literally changes. It hunches over, becomes timid, and is way more likely to lose again. Their posture and their brain are locked in this constant feedback loop. Then the book connects this ancient lobster biology to a very human pattern it calls the principle of unequal distribution. You see it everywhere. And to give you a sense of the scale, it points out how the world's 85 richest people have the same amount of wealth as the poorest 3.5 billion. It's a pretty stark example of how these hierarchies can play out. Which brings us to rule number 1. See, stand up straight with your shoulders back isn't just your mom's advice about posture. It's a command to your own nervous system. You're telling your brain to adopt the chemistry of that victorious lobster. It's about signaling to the world, and more importantly, to yourself, that you're ready to take on responsibility. Okay, so if we're standing tall on our own, what's next? Well, we've got to look at who we're standing with. This brings us to the idea behind Rule 3, which is basically about how the people around you can either drag you down or help lift you up. And the book gets really personal here, telling stories from the author's youth to show the stark difference between two types of friends: the ones who are stuck in a downward spiral and the ones who are aiming for something better, for themselves and for you. The story about a childhood friend named Chris is just a gut punch. His whole resentful, nihilistic view of the world was, according to the book, perfectly symbolized by his pickup truck. It was covered in dents, inside and out, like a physical manifestation of a life that was just constantly crashing into things. So what keeps people in these negative cycles? The book shares this grim old joke about hell. There's a cauldron of sinners that needs no demons to guard it, because as the punchline goes, if one tries to escape, the others pull him back in. It's a pretty chilling metaphor for how some groups can hold each other down with resentment. So, if the plan is to stand up straight and surround yourself with people who want the best for you, what's the point of it all? Well, it's about learning how to walk that line right between order and chaos. And this quote, this is it. This is the core of the whole thing. A meaningful life isn't found by just staying safe in what you already know, in order. It's about having one foot firmly planted in what you've mastered and sticking the other foot out into the chaos, into what you're trying to figure out next. And this is a super important distinction the book makes. We're not aiming for a state of constant happiness. Meaning, it argues, is found in the process. It's about willingly taking on challenges that are just a little bit beyond what you can already do. That's the real antidote to the suffering that life inevitably throws at you. So when you look at it that way, these 12 rules aren't some rigid moral code. They're more like tools. They're practical strategies for taking on the awesome responsibility of confronting chaos, looking suffering right in the eye, and building a meaningful life out of that struggle. Which leaves us with one last simple question, a question that really brings the whole book's call to action home to you. What's one thing in your life right now that you know you could improve,
and that you'd actually be willing to improve. According to this book, the answer is simple. Start right there.